How's it going? Welcome back to Dylan Pickups blog. So we had a viewer ask us to talk more specifically about no-load tone pots. And you know, no-load tone pots are one of those things that they're out there, and some people think, well, it sounds cool, I should have one. So let's talk about, first of all, how they work and what they actually do. And then second of all, do you really want one? Because not everybody does. So, and it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's just, do you really want one? Does it fit your playing style and your tone? So we'll talk about that. Alright, so if we go back to our video about pots in general, and how they work, we remember that basically a tone pot is pretty much just a variable resistor, and what it does is you have your cap down here, and usually it's soldered to the back of the pot, and it's that's ground, and we have our signal here, and at 0 ohms, so inside that pot there's like 2 raised tracks of carbon in there, and if we were to say this inside one is basically, and there's a couple different ways to do this, and we'll get into, and maybe in another video, a couple of different ways to wire your tone. But this is just a real basic way. But so the inside here is shorted to ground. That's what this is hooked to. Okay, it's basically just hooked to ground through the capacitor. And we know the capacitor affects how much of the high frequency gets filtered. And then this other side is a variable track of carbon, so it starts at 0, theoretically 0. Not all pots are perfect, so theoretically it starts at 0 and it variably works its way around to whatever its higher value is. And so we're going to say that this one is a 500K pot, so as it gets around to here, it's 500K. When that wiper inside is very, very close or at 0, if this is 0 ohms, then the resistance is 100 is basically a short. So your signal, all your signal goes through the capacitor to ground, filtering off whatever highs are there. Okay, and as you turn this knob up, this resistance gets further away from 0, and less of those highs proportionately go through this capacitor to ground. So all the way up here is at 10, and that's when your knob is all the way up, and it's having the least amount of effect. Now, we discussed before that a 500K pot gives you a higher ceiling of available frequencies from your pickups, because remember that even when your tone knob is all the way up, it's still 500K. So it still is a resistor between your signal through the capacitor and ground. That's why you'll hear some guys will actually put a tone bypass circuit in there, which basically is a switch that makes it to where it bypasses the thing completely. So basically the way this works, if you want no load on your circuit at all, is you would basically just have a no-load tone pot. You can modify it yourself, or you can buy one. It's easier just to buy one. And it breaks that right there. So when that wiper comes around, see, you're still putting some resistance to ground all the way up to here, all the way up to here, then all of a sudden you hit this blank spot and you're not putting anything to ground. Nothing at all. So all of a sudden, it's like there's no pot there at all whatsoever, and that this whole tone circuit is not even having any effect on the guitar at all. So the big question is, do you want a no-load tone pot in your guitar? A no-load tone pot is one of those terms, you see it on the internet or whatever, and you think, that's a pretty cool feature, I'd like to have that because it sounds pretty cool. Well, what does it actually do to your tone? Remember that when you have a given value of a pot turned up to 10, it's 500K or it's 250K, and that is kind of, and we talked about this in our other video, it's kind of representative of the overall available, not the number itself, but just in relation to each other. It's kind of representative of the overall available frequencies coming from your pickup that you're going to hear. So if you have the same exact pickup over here, and that's a terrible drawing of a pickup, but let's just say this is our pickup, and you have the same exact pickup and you go from 500 to 250, you have effectively lowered the available frequencies, high frequencies, that you're going to hear from your pickup. That's basically it. What this means is, if you were to now 100% cut this out, then you will hear a difference in tone. There's a couple things you'll hear. Depending on how your tone circuit is wired, you may hear a difference in volume, and you also hear a difference in how much treble and highs there are, because what you've done is all of a sudden, let's say you have a single coil it's a very bright pickup with a 22K pot on it, pretty bright setup, right? And you have a 250K pot on it, then all of a sudden you cut that out completely by doing this no load tone pot when it's on 10, and you went from this very bright setup and you let it get brighter. It's possible that because the setup was completely, totally bright already, that you may not hear very much difference. It just depends on the rest of your setup. If you have a very, very dark setup, let's say that same setup and you had a 47K pot on there, and you had the 250K, and then you had a humbucker. Most guys wouldn't do that, but let's say it was very, very dark like that, and then you cut out that pot, you cut out that tone circuit. Then all of a sudden it jumps up very, very bright. Some people might not like it. So depending on your setup, if the guitar is already very bright, you may not hear very much difference. If the guitar is set up to be very, very dark, it might jump out at you when you do it. In volume and in treble, that is all of a sudden available when you turn the knob to 10. The other factor to think about is how you actually play your guitar. Personally, I use my knobs all the time. I use my volume and I use my tone all the time. And actually, my tone knob, I have no load tone circuits in most of my guitars, and I use it a lot. I turn my tone probably is at 7 a lot of the times. But I like to, in my personal setups on my guitars, and this is the way we do it here, is I like to take as much frequency that is available from the pickup and have it available. So I put 500K pots in almost everything, even single coils. And then I cap them down basically depending on the setup that I want. And then when you turn your tone knob down, it has more of an effect and you can darken it back up as much as you want. That's the way we do it, because then I have that much flexibility at all, across the board. And then I have a no load tone pot on top of it, and I can go from very, very, very bright with, like, let's say a Telecaster bridge pickup, but I put a 47K pot on it, or a 47 microfarad cap on it, and I put a 500K tone pot on it, and I can darken it way, way, way up with the tone if I want. So I have all that flexibility. That's the way I like to do it. And then turn it all the way back up, and you have none at all, and it's super, super bright if you want it. A lot of guys don't do that. A lot of guys will just run their knob all the way up at 10 all the time, and they don't use all that flexibility. And it might be kind of a waste for them. They might not like that at all. So think about how you play the guitar too, and how you use your setup. If you use your tone knobs a lot, and you're turning them down, and you're turning them up, and you're doing all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you want that bright because you want to step out for something, then maybe you want it. If you leave it up at 10, and your guitar is already bright, and you think all you're going to probably do is adjust it back out with your amp, then you may not want it. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a buzzword on the internet, and people say, well, it sounds cool, I should have one. Think about your setup, and think about how you play first before you decide if you want to have a no-load tone pot. I think they're great, but the next guy might not. So just think about that before you do it, And if you have any other questions about this or anything else that we've covered, or you want to add, this was actually provided by a viewer that wanted to know a little bit more about them when he saw our other video on pots. So please participate, ask questions, give us some ideas, and we will see you tomorrow.